security and make sure aid gets...
Dozens of people have died
Base forces and other forces.
Millions of people have been ordered to evacuate in
to
Japan.
help the people in the quake zone.
Rain, sleet and snow are slowing down.
What if the ground under your feet isn't nearly as solid as you think? What if, in a flash, everything you know could be wiped off the map? We're about to explore 10 of the deadliest earthquakes of the modern era. But this isn't just about the raw power of nature. This is a story about fatal flaws. Powerful, but not nearly as strong as many others on this list. What made this earthquake so apocalyptic was its fatal flaw, a direct hit on one of the most vulnerable places on Earth. The epicenter was just 15 miles southwest of Port-au-Prince, the densely packed capital of Haiti. And critically, the quake was incredibly shallow, only about 8 miles deep. This meant almost none of the seismic energy was lost on its way to the surface. The full, raw force of the quake was unleashed directly on the city. Haiti, the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, was tragically unprepared. Building codes were weak and almost entirely unenforced. Most buildings were poorly constructed from unreinforced concrete, designed more to withstand hurricanes than earthquakes. When the ground started to shake, the city just disintegrated. Heavy concrete roofs pancaked down, crushing everyone inside. The presidential palace, the National Assembly, hospitals, schools, and homes all just ceased to exist. The country's entire infrastructure was crippled. The port was destroyed, the airport was damaged, and roads were blocked, creating a bottleneck that severely delayed international aid. For days, survivors dug through rubble with their bare hands, searching for loved ones. The result was a human toll that is still hard to comprehend. The Haitian government reported a staggering death toll of 316,000 people. It is critical to note, however, that this figure is heavily disputed, with other credible studies providing much lower estimates, some between 46,000 and 85,000. But even using the lower numbers, the 2010 Haiti earthquake stands as a horrifying example of how poverty, a lack of regulation, and a shallow, direct-hit earthquake can combine to create a tragedy on an almost unimaginable scale. 2. The 1970 Ancash earthquake, Peru. Our journey continues in Peru on the afternoon of May 31st, 1970. At 3:23 p.m., a magnitude 7.9 earthquake struck off the coast, shaking a huge region. The tremor itself was devastating, with some reports claiming it destroyed a vast number of buildings in coastal cities like Chimbote. The fatal flaw here, though, wasn't just the shaking, it was what the shaking unleashed. The quake destabilized the northern wall of Mount Huascarán, Peru's highest peak. A colossal chunk of glacial ice and rock, about a mile long, broke free and started a terrifying descent. This wasn't just a landslide, it was a biblical-scale avalanche. Estimates suggest around 80 million cubic meters of mud, rock, and ice churned down the mountain at speeds approaching 335 kilometers per hour. Nothing could escape. This wall of debris completely buried the town of Yungay. Survivors described a horrifying wave of destruction that appeared in the valley, giving people just minutes to react. Tragically, most didn't have a chance. Out of Yungay's 20,000 residents, only a few hundred survived, mainly those who scrambled to the high ground of the local cemetery. All told, the quake and the avalanche claimed an estimated 70,000 lives, making it one of the worst natural disasters in Peru's history. The fatal flaw was a deadly combination: an earthquake hitting a geologically unstable region, where the mountains themselves became the weapon. 3. The 2005 Kashmir earthquake, Pakistan. On the morning of October 8, 2005, at 8:50 a.m., a magnitude 7.6 earthquake tore through the mountainous Kashmir region, primarily in Pakistan-administered territory. The epicenter was near the city of Muzaffarabad, which was about to become the heart of a massive humanitarian crisis. The timing of this quake was especially cruel. It was a Saturday morning and schools were full. The fatal flaw here was tragically simple: shoddy construction. Thousands of school buildings, many made from unreinforced concrete, pancaked almost instantly. One widely cited estimate suggests that around 19,000 children were killed in their classrooms, buried in the rubble of places they were sent to be safe. The devastation wasn't just in schools. In Muzaffarabad, nearly half of all buildings were annihilated. The remote, mountainous terrain made rescue efforts a nightmare. Roads were wiped out by landslides, cutting off entire villages for weeks. Survivors were left homeless, facing the harsh Himalayan winter with no shelter. The final death toll is estimated to be around 87,000 people, though some sources believe it was over 100,000. The Kashmir earthquake is a horrifying reminder of how fragile infrastructure can turn a powerful quake into a catastrophe. 4. The 1948 Ashgabat earthquake, Turkmenistan. In the dead of night on October 6, 1948 at 1:12 a.m., the city of Ashgabat, then capital of the Turkmen Soviet Socialist Republic, was practically erased. A magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck just 25 kilometers away. It lasted only 10 seconds, but that was all it took. The first fatal flaw was construction. Almost all of the buildings in Ashgabat were made from adobe, sun-dried mud bricks with zero steel reinforcement. They stood no chance. The structures dissolved almost instantly, trapping tens of thousands of people as they slept. A young boy named Saparmurat Niyazov, who would one day become president of Turkmenistan, lost his entire family in the disaster. But the second, more sinister fatal flaw was political. This all happened under the iron-fisted censorship of the Soviet government. The true scale of the disaster was hidden from the world, and even from most of the Soviet Union. This information blackout was deadly. By banning any reports on the number of casualties, the government failed to send the help that was needed. Post-Soviet records later revealed the horrifying truth. While early official numbers were as low as 10,000, it's now estimated that around 110,000 people died, a massive portion of the city's population. The Ashgabat earthquake is a chilling example of how government secrecy can be just as deadly as the quake itself. 5. The 1923 Great Kanto earthquake, Japan. Just before noon on September 1, 1923, a massive 7.9 magnitude earthquake hit Japan's Kanto plain, rocking Tokyo and the port city of Yokohama. The initial shaking was immense, toppling buildings and wrecking infrastructure. But the true catastrophe, the fatal flaw, was fire. The quake hit at 11:58 a.m., just as countless families were lighting their charcoal and gas stoves to cook lunch. As the ground heaved, these stoves were knocked over, igniting hundreds of fires at once across the dense wooden cities. To make matters worse, high winds from a nearby typhoon fanned the flames, merging them into monstrous firestorms that roared through the streets. With water mains shattered by the quake, fire departments were helpless. One of the most horrific moments of the disaster happened at a former Army clothing depot. Nearly 40,000 people had gathered in the large open space, thinking they were safe from collapsing buildings. But the firestorm surrounded them, creating a freak weather event known as a dragon twist, a 300-foot-tall fire tornado that swept through the crowd. In just 15 minutes, an estimated 38,000 of the 40,000 people there were incinerated. The fires burned for 2 days. When it was all over, estimates of the dead and missing ranged from 105,000 to over 142,000. The vast majority of those deaths were caused by the fires, a brutal lesson that what comes after a quake can be even deadlier. 6. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, Japan. On March 11, 2011, at 2:46 p.m., the largest earthquake in Japan's recorded history hammered the nation's northeastern coast. At magnitude 9.1, it was one of the most powerful quakes ever measured anywhere on the globe. This was a mega-thrust earthquake, where the Pacific Plate violently lurched under the plate Japan's nearing, and its buildings are among the toughest on the planet. The true fatal flaw came from the sea. The quake displaced a colossal amount of water, generating a monster tsunami. Within an hour, waves with maximum localized heights of up to 40 meters, that's 130 feet, crashed into the coastline. In some low-lying areas, the water surged up to 10 kilometers inland. The tsunami swept over seawalls that were built for much smaller events, swallowing entire towns whole. But the disaster wasn't over. The waves flooded the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, knocking out its emergency cooling systems. This led to a series of reactor meltdowns and a nuclear crisis that the world is still dealing with. In the end, over 15,700 people were confirmed dead, with thousands more missing, the vast majority of them from drowning. The 2011 Tohoku event proved that even for the most prepared nation on Earth, some forces of nature are just too big for our best defenses. The scale of these events is honestly hard to wrap your head around. Each number represents a person, a family, a story of loss. If you're finding this look into history and science as compelling as we do, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep making content like this. Now, let's get back to the countdown. 7. The 1920 Haiyuan earthquake, China. On the evening of December 16, 1920, one of the most destructive earthquakes of the 20th century hit a remote and poor region of China. With a magnitude estimated between 7.8 and 8.5, the Haiyuan earthquake unleashed devastation across a huge rural landscape. The death toll is staggering, with modern estimates putting it at over 273,000 people. The fatal flaw in Haiyuan was a mix of geology and architecture. The region is on the Loess Plateau, an area covered in fine yellow soil called loess. For centuries, people there lived in yaodongs, or cave dwellings, dug directly into the Loess cliffs. They were cheap and well insulated, but they were also a death trap in an earthquake. When the quake hit, the Loess cliffs simply gave way. The event triggered what some studies estimate to be over 675 major landslides, burying entire villages in an instant. The village of Sujiahe was completely entombed. Survivors described mountains that seemed to walk. It's believed that landslides alone killed over 30,000 people. For those who survived the slides, their cave homes often collapsed around them. Then came a second killer, the brutal winter. With their homes gone and aftershocks making them too scared to build shelters, countless people simply froze to death. The Haiyuan earthquake is a terrifying look at how local geology and centuries-old traditions can combine to create a catastrophe. 8. The 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami. The day after Christmas in 2004, the world watched a disaster unfold on a global scale. At 7:58 a.m. local time, a colossal magnitude 9.1 to 9.3 earthquake ruptured the seafloor off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia. This mega-thrust quake released the energy of thousands of atomic bombs as the Indian tectonic plate slid under the Burma plate. The rupture was immense, stretching for around 1,500 kilometers and lifting the seafloor by several meters, displacing a truly massive volume of water. This was the fatal flaw, the birth of the deadliest tsunami in recorded history. Traveling across the open ocean at the speed of a jetliner, the wave was barely noticeable. But as it neared the shallow coastlines across the Indian Ocean, all that energy compressed and the wave rose to terrifying heights, making it one of the single deadliest disasters of the modern era. The 2004 event was a brutal wake-up call that the consequences of one earthquake could cross oceans and bring death to shores thousands of miles away. 9. The 1976 Tangshan earthquake, China. At 3:42 in the morning on July 28, 1976, the industrial city of Tangshan in northeastern China, home to over 1 million people, basically ceased to exist. A magnitude 7.6 earthquake struck, with its epicenter running directly underneath the city. The catastrophe that followed was the result of a trifecta of fatal flaws. First, the timing. The quake hit in the darkest hour of the morning, when almost everyone was asleep indoors, leaving no time to react. Second, a massive underestimation of risk. Chinese scientists at the time didn't believe Tangshan was in a high-risk zone. As a result, the city was built with no thought given to seismic safety. Buildings were mostly unreinforced brick, a material that shatters during an earthquake. The third flaw was the sheer violence of the shaking. The quake was so shallow and so close that it earned an intensity rating of 11 on a scale of 12, which means extreme. The combination was absolute. In just 16 seconds, 85% of the buildings in Tangshan collapsed. Power, water, and communication lines were all severed instantly, cutting the city off from the world. Survivors who clawed their way out of the debris found a nightmare. Their entire city was gone. The official death toll released by the Chinese government was 242,769, making it the deadliest earthquake of the 20th century. Many experts, however, believe the true number was far higher, possibly over 300,000. Tangshan is perhaps the ultimate example of what happens when a powerful, unexpected earthquake strikes a completely unprepared city. 10. The 2023 Turkey-Syria earthquakes. On February 6, 2023, a new and horrifying chapter was written in the history of earthquakes. At 4:17 a.m., as millions slept, a massive magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck southern and central Turkey, near the border with Syria. The quake was shallow, originating about 18 kilometers or 11 miles deep, which meant the shaking at the surface was exceptionally violent. The initial shock was devastating enough, but the first fatal flaw was a brutal 1-2 punch. Just 9 hours later, a second, almost equally powerful magnitude 7.5 earthquake hit the same region. Buildings that were damaged and weakened by the first quake were completely obliterated by the second. Rescue workers and civilians searching for survivors were themselves caught in a new wave of collapses. The second fatal flaw was the widespread failure of modern buildings. Thousands of multi-story apartment buildings, which were supposed to have been built to modern earthquake codes, collapsed like houses of cards. This pointed to a systemic problem of poor construction and a failure to enforce building regulations. Entire neighborhoods were flattened, entombing families in what should have been safe homes. The third flaw was the weather. The disaster hit in the middle of a brutal winter. Survivors were left homeless in freezing temperatures, and heavy snow hampered rescue efforts, making it nearly impossible for aid to reach some of the hardest hit areas. The result was a humanitarian crisis stretched across 2 countries. The combined death toll from this catastrophic sequence exceeded 59,000 people. A stark and modern reminder of the immense tragedy that can unfold when the earth moves. From the walking mountains of China to the fire tornadoes of Tokyo, from the government secrecy in Ashgabat to the pancaked buildings of Port-au-Prince, the story of the world's deadliest earthquakes is always a story of fatal flaws. It's a story of buildings that weren't ready, of risks that were ignored, and of secondary disasters. Tsunamis, landslides, and fires